The purpose of this video is to explain the microcontroller hardware requirements for ME EE106 for fall 2020. You should be watching this video in the first week of the semester because there are some actions that you are going to need to take to be prepared for the microcontroller related coursework and labs that are coming in the next 2 to 3 weeks. For the exact dates by which you'll need to have your microcontroller hardware in hand, consult the course syllabus and attend the first lecture if you have any questions. This video doesn't deal with anything about how to actually use the microcontroller board yet. That will come in a few weeks. This just discusses why you need a board, which board, and either later in this video or in the next one, we'll talk about how to get one for yourself, more than likely in the next video. A key part of ME106 is learning how to use a microcontroller as part of a mechatronics system. The microcontroller board that's used for this course is the Adafruit Feather M4 Express board. For brevity, we also always refer to this board as the FM4E or even just the Feather or the Feather board. Pretty much without exception, everyone in the course will need to purchase a board for themselves. In normal times, there are some students that try and share boards, and to be honest, this usually doesn't work so well. But in coronavirus times, and with all this remote learning stuff going on, this rarely successful strategy will be almost impossible. The good news is that this purchase is less than $30. This isn't to say that you won't or can't incur more expenses when it comes time to do your final projects, but that depends entirely on what you choose to do for your project and what are the resources you may already have available to you already. Don't worry about that for now, as that will be the subject of one or more lectures a month or so into the course. What we're doing here in this course is using a version of Python that's designed to run on microcontrollers called CircuitPython. CircuitPython and MicroPython, from which CircuitPython originated, is based on Python version 3, which is pretty much the standard Python that everybody uses now on PCs and servers. Until 2 semesters ago, we used the Arduino language, which is really just the C++ language packaged up with some libraries of code for the Arduino family of microcontroller boards. The Arduino setup has been quite popular for nearly a decade because back then it made it substantially easier for non-EEs to get off the ground using microcontrollers. CircuitPython cuts this ramp-up period down to literally just a few minutes, down from the half hour or so required to get off the ground with the Arduino, and down from the 5 or 10 hours it took us to get going with the previous board that we used about a decade ago. Now, if you haven't learned Python coming into this course, which I suspect most of you haven't, it's a pretty easy language to pick up, having learned any other language before this. It's significantly easier than C and C++. But if for whatever reason you really want to use C, C++, Arduino, whatever you want to call it, for your final projects, that's usually fine with most professors as long as you clear it with them beforehand. It may even be possible to use a different microcontroller board entirely if your project has special requirements that really aren't feasible with this board for either language reasons or the compute power of the particular hardware you're looking into. So in particular, the Raspberry Pi or one of the newer Arduinos that you may have used are 2 platforms that are certainly viable in that sense. If your lecture is fine with you using C++, Arduino, whatever you want to call it for your final project, you should know that the Arduino software is also supported on this board and not just CircuitPython. So even if you really wanted to use that C++ type language, you can do that on this board also, not just on one of the classic Arduino boards. So it's possible to use the very same board for both CircuitPython and Arduino use. However, this does not absolve you from having to learn enough Python to get through this course, because all the labs use CircuitPython. Although it depends on who exactly is teaching this course, you're very, very likely going to need Python for homeworks and tests also, not just the labs. The same is probably true of needing to become familiar with this particular hardware board that we're using this semester, rather than just trying to live off of whatever particular knowledge and information that you happen to know about the old Arduino Uno, which you may have previously used. If you have any questions about this also, you should discuss this with your lecturer. Now, as an ME, we anticipate that many of you are going to be doing a fair amount of programming on the PC and on hardware during the remainder of your classes here and later on in your career. And that's why we're teaching you Python and using a microcontroller board like this. So I haven't explicitly said this, but we switched over 2 years ago to introducing Python as the language that's used in ME30. So as of last year, we've switched this course over to Python also. So the mechatronics, most of the mechatronics track is now aligned pretty substantially on Python, and that may even become true with the capstone course going forward. Not clear, I can't speak for the lecturers that normally teach the capstone course, but it's very likely that you may get introduced to Python depending on who's teaching that course in the future. So both Python and this hardware are simple enough that you should be able to leave this course realizing that there's quite a lot of useful things that you can accomplish that are fun and realistic with what you've learned in this course. So assuming that you actually do your own work, every one of you should be able to have a decent conversation in a job interview, or once you get hired later on in a project team meeting about how mechanical components and electronics and software all fit together in an interesting, useful, viable system. So more and more ME jobs are going to require you to know enough about programming just to learn how to use your CAD and data analysis and automation tools at some level. And you're only screwing yourself by trying to skate by or trying to avoid it completely in this course. And I got to warn you, if you leave college not knowing how to do more than one thing, some of your core ME classes, unless you're really good at that one thing, you're a really good target for having your job or prospects for a better one go to somebody else who does know more than just, one narrow part of the program. So, for the good news, if you happen to take ME30 in either of the last 2 semesters, you already have the minimum hardware required that you need for this course, because the FM4E, the Feather M4 Express board, is the black board that's at the center of the kit that you bought back then. And I think I have a picture. So here's the kit that you bought last semester, or a very, very similar one the semester before. And the FM4E is this board that's right here in the center. And the USB cable that you'll also need too. We'll talk more about that in the next video. So now if you took ME30 before that, before last fall 2019, we used the Arduino Uno, or technically we used a clone, which was the main board for the kit that came with that course. And we also used this board for that board for ME106 up until the fall of 2019. Like I said, just until about a year ago. So even though this course is no longer focused on using those microcontroller boards, both the main board, the Uno, and the accessory board that plugged into it can also be used for most of your final projects, perhaps for this course, using either the Uno or the FM4E that you may already have from the last year in ME30 that's at the center of the kit. Now, why you might actually want to use the Arduino is a subject for another video, and it won't be discussed here, but hopefully we'll get to that later in the course and be able to pit the two against each other, and why you still might want to use that 10-year-old piece of hardware for certain types of projects. So if you are in the category of students that I haven't discussed already, that is ME30 students who use the Uno, or ME30 students that have used the newer FM4E board, you are probably in the category of a transfer student. You probably did not take ME30 here then, and you almost certainly don't have one of these boards, or probably not even anything like it. So you haven't used a microcontroller board before, whether it's with Python, C, C++, Java, whatever. So in that respect, you're a tiny bit behind some of your continuing SJSU student peers. And however, as already mentioned, many of your continuing peers are in a similar situation, never necessarily having used this particular board or having learned Python either, because as I said, we've only been using Python for ME30 for just the last 2 years. And it's not unusual for students who have taken maybe ME30 as a freshman and not having gotten around to taking this course until they follow their senior year. So for some students, it may actually be 2, 3, in some cases 4 years since you took ME30 and now finding yourself here in ME106. However, everybody who did take ME30 here does have at least some microcontroller exposure, which does put you probably a solid week or two at a disadvantage. However, on the bright side, assuming that you actually did your work in community college or wherever you transferred for your units from, you are probably or possibly in a better situation, because here ME30 is only a 2-unit programming class, and wherever you likely are transferring your programming, introductory programming course credits in from, you probably had a 3 and maybe even in some cases a 4-unit class. So in that respect, you are quite possibly or even probably ahead of the game in that respect, if not a bit behind in the microcontroller exposure area. So the next video is going to describe what you need to get for the course in terms of hardware, and as long as your lecture doesn't require you to purchase anything else because of this whole distance learning situation, actually it's not really up to your professor at that point, it's really up to the kind of the whole university. So as long as you have lab access, we do not anticipate that you'll need to buy anything else just for the lab portion of the course, or homeworks for that matter. So there should be, or hopefully there's not going to be any other requirements to purchase non-project components for the course. And let's hope that it stays that way, and hope that everything doesn't collapse like it did last semester, where everything went to distance learning with no advance warning. So take care and good luck, and watch the next video.